November 13th, 1942. 0148 hours. On the bridge of the destroyer Amatsuke's in the infamous Iron Bottom Sound, Commander Tameichi Hara gripped the railing. Star shells burst overhead, bathing his ship in a harsh, ghostly white light. For 20 years, the Imperial Japanese Navy had meticulously refined night combat into a formidable art form. Yet now, American shells were bracketing his destroyer before his lookouts could even spot the enemy's muzzle flashes. Through the bridge windows, Hara witnessed something that shattered 2 decades of Japanese naval doctrine. American ships were firing with uncanny accuracy at ranges beyond 10,000 yards, in absolute darkness. Their shells arrived with mechanical, terrifying precision. No searchlights betrayed their positions. No star shells preceded their salvos. The USS Helena's radar-directed guns had found the Amatsuke's, and when Hara, in a desperate attempt to locate his attackers, left his searchlights on for too long, the American cruiser's 6-inch shells ripped through his ship, killing 43 of his crew. Just 3 kilometers away, the battleship High shuddered under a concentrated barrage from enemies her lookouts couldn't see. The pride of the Imperial fleet, a veteran of Pearl Harbor, was being systematically destroyed by adversaries fighting from beyond visual range. What no Japanese officer yet understood was that they were witnessing the full deployment of the SG surface search radar. This technology would not only transform naval warfare, but would utterly dismantle Japan's most crucial tactical advantage within 18 short months. The grim calculus of defeat was being forged not merely in ships lost or territories surrendered, but in the sudden, brutal obsolescence of 2 decades of training, doctrine, and a national strategy built on one fundamental assumption, that the Imperial Japanese Navy owned the night. The mastery of darkness, undermined by light. The Imperial Japanese Navy's command of night combat had been meticulously cultivated since the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. The Battle of Tsushima, where Admiral Togo's torpedo boats devastated the Russian fleet under the cloak of darkness, became a sacred text. It solidified night combat as the bedrock of Japanese naval strategy, their proven method for overcoming numerically superior enemies. By 1942, this doctrine had evolved into the most sophisticated night fighting system in the world. Japanese sailors trained relentlessly in darkness. Lookouts underwent specialized programs to enhance their night vision, spending hours in darkened rooms, meticulously avoiding vitamin A deficiencies, and perfecting distance estimation in low-light conditions. The average Japanese lookout could spot ship silhouettes at 7,000 meters on a moonless night, a staggering twice the distance of their American counterparts. The technological landscape seemed to reinforce Japanese superiority. While America's primitive radar sets were largely distrusted by its captains, Japanese optics were world-leading. Their binoculars, manufactured by Nippon Kagaku, later Nikon, offered exceptional magnification with superior light-gathering capabilities. Their Type 93 long lance torpedoes could strike targets at an incredible 24,000 yards, a range far beyond anything American ships could detect at night. The early Pacific War seemed to validate every one of these assumptions. At the Battle of Savo Island on August 9, 1942, Japanese cruisers annihilated an Allied force in 33 minutes of night combat, sinking 4 heavy cruisers without losing a single ship. At the Battle of Tassafaronga on November 30, 1942, a lone Japanese destroyer squadron would savage a superior American cruiser force, torpedoing 4 ships in mere minutes. Unbeknownst to the Imperial Navy, a silent revolution in radar technology was unfolding in American shipyards and laboratories. The Invisible Eye. The SG Surface Search Radar, developed under the brilliant guidance of the MIT Radiation Laboratory and the Naval Research Laboratory, represented a quantum leap from the primitive sets that had failed so spectacularly at Savo Island. Operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength with a powerful 50-kilowatt output, the SG radar could detect a destroyer at 15 nautical miles and track it with enough accuracy for blind firing at 10 miles. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, established in November 1940, had swelled to nearly 4,000 employees by 1943. The cornerstone of their work was the cavity magnetron, delivered by the British Tizard mission in September 1940. a device historian James Finney Baxter III famously called the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores. This technology enabled the production of approximately 1,000 SG radar sets during the war. The first Fletcher-class destroyer, USS Fletcher, DD 445, commissioned on June 30, 1942, carried this revolutionary system as standard equipment. By November 1942, Fletcher herself was operating in the Solomon Islands, though she would be the only Fletcher-class destroyer present at the naval battle of Guadalcanal. The Plan Position Indicator, PPI, scope provided a god's-eye view of the battle space, displaying all contacts on a circular screen that updated every 2 seconds. Operators could distinguish between ship types, track torpedo wakes, and even spot periscope-depth submarines. The system worked equally well in daylight or darkness, clear weather or storms, smoke or fog. The SG radar was seamlessly integrated with the Mark 37 gun director, linked to an analog computer that could calculate firing solutions in seconds, automatically adjusting for target speed, course, wind, and ship motion. The 5-inch/38 caliber guns, standard armament on Fletcher-class destroyers, could fire 15 to 20 rounds per minute with radar-directed accuracy. The night the odds changed. The night of November 12 to 13, 1942, irrevocably began the shattering of Japanese assumptions. The naval battle of Guadalcanal commenced when Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force intercepted Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment group approaching Henderson Field. While only USS Fletcher represented the new destroyer class, several ships carried SG radar, including USS Helena. At 0124 hours, Helena's SG radar detected Japanese ships at 27,000 yards, far beyond visual range. For the next 20 minutes, American radar operators tracked the approaching Japanese force, while Japanese lookouts strained futilely into the darkness. The battle descended into chaos as American radar-directed fire disrupted Japanese formations before they could even employ their superior night-fighting tactics. The destroyer Akatsuki, attempting her specialized night torpedo attack, was caught in radar-directed crossfire from multiple American ships. She exploded and sank in minutes. Commander Hara on Amatsuke's experienced this new reality firsthand. His ship successfully torpedoed USS Barton, breaking her in half, and USS Juneau, leaving her crippled. But when he illuminated USS San Francisco with searchlights to improve his gunnery, USS Helena's radar-directed guns immediately found Amatsuke's in the darkness, causing severe damage and heavy casualties. The battleship High, flagship of Admiral Abe, became the focus of American radar-directed fire. In darkness and rain squalls that should have provided concealment, she absorbed 85 shell hits from enemies firing at ranges beyond Japanese visual capability. Her bridge was wrecked, her steering destroyed, her superstructure ablaze. She would be scuttled the next day, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. A growing chasm. The disparity between Japanese and American night-fighting capabilities grew increasingly apparent through late 1942 and early 1943. The American SG radar operated at 3 GHz with 50 kilowatts peak power, detecting destroyers at 15+ nautical miles with accuracy of plus or minus 40 yards in range and plus or minus 0.5 degrees in bearing. Its weight of 1,000 pounds and 95% operational availability made it practical for widespread deployment. In stark contrast, the Japanese Type 22 radar operated at 150 MHz with only 2 kilowatts peak power, detecting destroyers at 10 nautical miles under optimal conditions with accuracy of plus or minus 300 yards in range and plus or minus 5 degrees in bearing. Weighing 2,200 pounds with only 40% operational availability, it was both cumbersome and unreliable. Of the first 60 Type 22 sets built, only about 6 actually worked. Total Japanese radar production during the war reached only about 300 units, less than one-third of American SG production alone. This technological gap reflected deeper organizational problems. Japan had actually developed cavity magnetrons by 1937, and Dr. Hidetsugu Yagi had invented the directional antenna that bore his name in 1926. Yet, military leadership excluded Yagi from radar work. When Japanese forces later captured British radar equipment with Yagi antennas, they were unaware the design referred to a Japanese invention. Army-Navy rivalry prevented coordination, with both services developing separate, incompatible systems. During the Battle of Vella on October 6 to 7, 1943, USS Selfridge detected and tracked long-lance torpedoes using radar, allowing evasion of weapons that had been invariably lethal in earlier battles. The Fletcher-class destroyer's radar advantage extended beyond simple detection to complete tactical superiority. The Tokyo Express, high-speed destroyer runs to resupply Guadalcanal had depended entirely on Japanese night-fighting superiority. These missions, conducted by the finest destroyer captains in the Imperial Navy, began suffering increasing losses to radar-equipped American ships. Captain Reizo Tanaka, who commanded the 2nd Destroyer Squadron and led many Tokyo Express runs, would later write in his 1956 U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings article, Japan's Losing Struggle for Guadalcanal, about the growing American radar advantage. Though Tanaka's own tactical brilliance had achieved success at Tassafaronga, he recognized that darkness no longer provided protection against American technology. By early 1943, American destroyers were intercepting Tokyo Express runs in complete darkness, in rain, in squall conditions. They fired first, fired accurately, and pursued Japanese forces even when they fled at full speed into the night. The night of November 25, 1943, demonstrated the complete reversal of tactical advantage. 5 destroyers under Captain Arleigh Burke intercepted 5 Japanese destroyers off Cape St. George. In a running battle fought entirely by radar, Burke's squadron sank 3 Japanese destroyers, Onami, Makinami, and Yujiri, without taking significant damage. The Japanese never achieved visual contact with their attackers. This would be the last surface engagement in the Solomon Islands and marked the effective end of major surface combat in the area. By mid-1943, Japanese naval commanders were desperately trying to adapt to the new reality. The death of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto in April 1943 removed the leader who might have best understood the implications of American technological superiority. Japanese attempts to counter American radar proved futile. They deployed rudimentary radar countermeasures, aluminum strips called Gimanshi, deception paper, but these were ineffective against the sophisticated SG radar. Japanese radar development, hampered by inter-service rivalry and resource constraints, remained years behind American technology. Commander Hara, who survived the war as the only destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to do so, would later write in his memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain, about the growing realization among Japanese officers that their night-fighting expertise had become obsolete. Though his memoir contains some factual errors, his assessment of American technological superiority was accurate. The new reality, invisible warfare. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay on November 2, 1943, provided the clearest, most devastating demonstration of radar's transformation of naval combat. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill's Task Force 39, including several Fletcher-class destroyers with the latest SG radar modifications, intercepted a superior Japanese force under Rear Admiral Sentaro Omori. At 0227 hours, radar contact at 35,900 yards gave the Americans a complete tactical advantage. For the next few hours, American ships tracked the approaching enemy with perfect clarity, maneuvering for optimal firing positions while remaining utterly invisible to Japanese lookouts. The American destroyers displayed capabilities that seemed supernatural to Japanese observers. Ships engaged at ranges exceeding 14,000 yards in total darkness, scoring hits with their first salvos. They detected and evaded long-lance torpedoes using radar tracking of their wakes, then counterattacked the launching destroyers without ever making visual contact. The battle's outcome shocked the Japanese high command. Despite superior numbers and firepower, Omori's force was routed, losing the light cruiser Sendai and destroyer Hatsuke's while inflicting minimal damage. Samuel Eliot Morrison noted this battle marked the end of Japan's previous advantage in night engagement. The psychological impact on Japanese naval personnel transcended mere tactical defeat. Men who had spent years perfecting their night fighting skills watched helplessly as technology rendered their expertise worthless. The erosion of morale was starkly documented in Japanese operational reports. The vaunted long lance torpedoes, launched at radar-guided estimates, increasingly found only empty water. Elite destroyer crews who had considered themselves masters of night combat found themselves helpless against an enemy they couldn't see. The Fletcher-class production program represented American industrial might at its zenith. Between 1942 and 1944, American shipyards produced 175 Fletcher-class destroyers, more destroyers than Japan built of all types during the entire war. Each ship carried radar systems more sophisticated than anything in the Japanese fleet. The SG radar sets were manufactured by Western Electric, Westinghouse, and General Electric at a rate that defied Japanese comprehension. The magnetron tubes at the radar's heart, impossible for Japan to manufacture reliably, were mass-produced in American factories. By war's end, the United States had produced over 100,000 radar sets of all types. This disparity extended beyond mere production numbers. American radar improved continuously through the war, with each iteration increasing range, accuracy, and discrimination. By 1944, American destroyers carried radar systems that could detect a surface submarine at 18 miles and track a periscope at 3 miles. Meanwhile, Japanese radar development stagnated, hampered by a meager naval electrical research department and critical component shortages. Most crucially, Japan lacked the vast electronics industry that supported American radar development. The echo of defeat. As radar negated traditional night fighting tactics, the Imperial Navy desperately sought new doctrines. Orders from Combined Fleet Headquarters began acknowledging American radar superiority and emphasizing radical maneuvering and acceptance of higher casualties. These orders represented a complete capitulation to American technological superiority. The Imperial Navy, which had once sought night battles, now actively avoided them. When forced to fight, they employed tactics that accepted severe losses for the possibility of achieving torpedo launch positions. Training programs struggled to adapt. The torpedo school at Yokosuka attempted to develop blind launch techniques, firing spreads of torpedoes at calculated positions without visual contact, with minimal success rates. The Naval War College developed new night fighting doctrines based on accepting catastrophic casualties. Even Japan's submarine force, initially less affected by American radar superiority, soon encountered the technology's reach. Fleet submarines attempting to recharge batteries on the surface at night discovered that darkness no longer provided safety. The SG radar could detect a surface submarine at ranges exceeding 15 miles, far beyond visual range, even in daylight. Japanese submarines, dependent on surface running for speed and battery charging, found their operational effectiveness crippled. Transit speeds dropped from 15 knots surfaced to 3 knots submerged. Battery life limited underwater endurance to hours rather than days. American destroyer escorts equipped with radar hunted Japanese submarines with deadly efficiency. The USS England sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days during May 1944, all detected initially by radar. Japanese submarine losses reached catastrophic levels by late 1944. Japanese naval officers drew chilling parallels between their radar disadvantage and the B-29 bombing campaign. Just as American bombers struck from altitudes beyond Japanese interceptor reach, American destroyers struck from beyond visual range. Technology had created a sanctuary from which Americans could attack without risk. The psychological parallel was exact. Fighter pilots watching B-29s cruise overhead beyond their ceiling experienced the same helplessness as destroyer crews being shelled by invisible enemies. Traditional warrior skills, courage, training, spirit, meant nothing against technological superiority that prevented engagement entirely. The Battle of Vella Gulf in October 1944 provided the final devastating confirmation of radar's transformation of naval warfare. The largest naval battle in history became a technological mismatch that starkly demonstrated American superiority. During the Battle off Samar on October 25, 1944, the destroyer USS Johnston under Commander Ernest Evans engaged Japanese battleships using radar-directed fire in rain squalls and smoke. Despite being vastly outgunned, American destroyer escorts and destroyers used radar to coordinate attacks through smoke screens that completely blinded Japanese optical rangefinders. The Japanese ships used color-coded dyes in their shells. Yamato used white, Nagato brilliant pink, Haruna greenish-yellow, Congo blood-red, so optical spotters could identify fall of shot, a practice necessitated by their lack of fire control radar, contrasting starkly with American radar-controlled automatic firing systems. In Surigao Strait, American destroyers launched coordinated torpedo attacks from beyond visual range, guided entirely by radar. The battleship Fuso was torpedoed and sunk by destroyers her crew never saw. Japanese forces entered the strait piecemeal and were destroyed by radar-directed fire from ships they couldn't locate. The Battle of Vella Gulf on August 6 to 7, 1943, demonstrated the complete American mastery of radar-directed combat. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger's 6 destroyers detected 4 Japanese destroyers carrying 950 troops at 11:33 p.m. Using radar, the American force closed to optimal torpedo range undetected. The result was devastating. 3 Japanese destroyers, Hajikase, Arisher, and Kawakaze, were sunk with 1,210 Japanese sailors and soldiers killed. American casualties, 0. Not a single hit was scored on U.S. ships. Captain Tameichi Hara, commanding the sole Japanese survivor, Shigeru, later called it a perfect American victory. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz termed the battle a little classic of naval warfare, demonstrating how completely radar had reversed the night combat advantage. On November 25, 1943, Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 achieved another perfect radar victory at Cape St. George. Burke's Little Beavers detected 5 Japanese destroyers at 14,000 yards, tracked them undetected, and launched devastating attacks. 3 Japanese destroyers, Onami, Makinami, and Yujiri, were sunk with 647 Japanese killed. American losses, 0 casualties, 0 damage. Burke's after-action report was clinical. Entire engagement conducted by radar plot. Visual contact with enemy never achieved nor required. This battle convinced Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat was no longer viable against radar-equipped American forces. It marked the last surface engagement of the Solomon Islands campaign and effectively ended Japanese attempts to use destroyer forces in night combat. The immeasurable gap. American production figures starkly revealed the true technological gulf. The United States produced 175 Fletcher-class destroyers between 1942 and 1944, approximately 1,000 SG radar sets, over 100,000 radar sets of all types, 250,000 cavity magnetrons, 2.5 million radio tubes monthly by 1944, and trained 50,000 radar technicians, investing $1.5 billion, 1940s dollars, in radar development. Japanese production. In contrast, 32 destroyers of all types between 1942 and 1944, approximately 300 radar sets total, all types, 50,000 radio tubes monthly at peak, 500 partially trained radar technicians, and minimal investment in radar development. The disparity exceeded 50-1 in crucial areas. America had more radar sets on destroyers alone than Japan produced for all purposes. Every Fletcher-class destroyer represented industrial capacity Japan wouldn't achieve for decades. Japanese naval training programs never successfully adapted to the radar age. The infrastructure of 20 years, night vision training, lookout schools, optical ranging systems, became obsolete overnight, but couldn't be effectively replaced. The few Japanese radar sets available were primitive and unreliable. The Type 22 surface search radar, when it worked, had less than half the American SG radar's capability. More critically, it lacked the discrimination to separate targets or direct accurate gunfire. It used only an A-scope display, showing range as a spike on a line, rather than the SG's revolutionary PPI that showed all contacts on a map-like display. Training on these inferior sets proved counterproductive. Officers learned to distrust radar after multiple failures and returned to visual methods despite their inadequacy. The waters around Guadalcanal, dubbed Iron Bottom Sound for the ships resting on the seafloor, became the laboratory where radar warfare was perfected. The evolution of losses during night engagements documents this. August-September 1942, Japanese losses nearly equal American. October-November 1942, Japanese losses double American. December 1942 to January 1943, Japanese losses triple American. February 1943 onward, Japanese losses catastrophic, American minimal. By the end of the Guadalcanal campaign, Japan had lost 40 destroyers in 16 months. According to U.S. Naval Institute sources, the night fighting advantage that had been the cornerstone of Japanese naval strategy was completely reversed. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, rooted in samurai tradition and personal combat excellence, the radar revolution represented a cultural catastrophe. The premise that technology could replace warrior skill contradicted fundamental Japanese military philosophy. Young Japanese officers, raised on tales of samurai valor and personal combat, struggled to comprehend warfare where the enemy was invisible and unreachable. The radar gap challenged Japanese racial theories that had portrayed Americans as spiritually weak, dependent on technology, because they lacked warrior courage. Japanese attempts to counter American radar revealed both ingenuity and futility. Window, chaff, deployment proved ineffective against sophisticated American radars. Electronic warfare attempts failed completely. Japan lacked the electronics industry to produce jamming equipment in useful quantities. The Japanese attempted tactical solutions, including special paints supposed to reduce radar reflection, but tests proved these marginally effective at best. By mid-1944, the Naval Technical Department had essentially given up on matching American radar technology. The adoption of kamikaze tactics in October 1944 represented Japan's response to comprehensive defeat, not specifically to radar disadvantage. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi organized the first official kamikaze unit on October 19, 1944, at Mabalacat Airfield. His stated reason was that with only 40 operational aircraft and poorly trained pilots, conventional attacks were futile. The documented factors behind the kamikaze decision included catastrophic pilot losses, training deficiencies, loss of air superiority, and resource shortages. Radar disadvantage was never cited in contemporary documents as a factor in adopting suicide tactics. The first organized kamikaze attacks on October 25, 1944, coincidentally occurred the same day as the Battle of Samar, but were driven by desperation over pilot quality and aircraft availability, not radar concerns. The final reckoning. Statistics from Pacific War destroyer engagements starkly illustrated radar's impact. Pre-radar era, December 1941 to October 1942, Japanese night combat losses, 8 destroyers. American night combat losses, 11 destroyers. Exchange ratio, 1.4 to 1 favoring Japan. Early radar era, November 1942 to June 1943, Japanese night combat losses, 19 destroyers. American night combat losses, 7 destroyers. Exchange ratio, 2.7 to 1 favoring America. Mature radar era, July 1943 to August 1945, Japanese night combat losses, 47 destroyers. American night combat losses, 4 destroyers. Exchange ratio, 11.8 to 1 favoring America. The technical superiority of American radar systems exceeded Japanese capabilities by orders of magnitude. SG radar, American 3 GHz frequency, 10 cm wavelength, 50 kilowatts power, 15 plus nautical mile range against destroyers, plus or minus 40 yards range accuracy, plus or minus 0.5 degrees bearing accuracy, PPI display, 1,000 units produced. Type 22 radar, Japanese 150 MHz frequency, 2 m wavelength, 2 kilowatts power, 10 nautical mile range, optimal, plus or minus 300 yards range accuracy, plus or minus 5 degrees bearing accuracy. A-scope only display, 300 units total produced. The specifications revealed technological generations of difference. American radar operated at frequencies that provided better resolution, used magnetron tubes Japan couldn't manufacture reliably, and integrated with fire control systems Japan hadn't developed. Captured Japanese equipment and post-war interrogations revealed the depth of the technological gap. Japanese forces had actually captured examples of British cavity magnetrons early in the war, but couldn't reproduce them. When they captured radar sets with Yagi antennas, they didn't realize these were named after a Japanese inventor their own military had ignored. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey's post-war interviews with Japanese naval officers found universal agreement that radar had transformed naval warfare beyond Japanese ability to adapt. Officers testified that by 1943 they understood the radar gap, but suppressed this knowledge to maintain morale. The Battle of Cape St. George on November 25, 1943, served as the epitaph for Japanese night-fighting superiority. Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 achieved a perfect victory through radar, sinking 3 Japanese destroyers without loss. This battle convinced Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat was no longer viable. Orders from Combined Fleet essentially abandoned night destroyer actions, acknowledging that night combat advantage now belonged entirely to the enemy. The MIT Radiation Laboratory deserves special recognition for revolutionizing naval warfare. Established in November 1940, it grew to nearly 4,000 employees and designed half of all radar systems deployed by U.S. forces. The lab's work went far beyond the SG radar, developing over 100 different microwave systems worth $1.5 billion in production. The foundation was the British cavity magnetron, a single device producing 1 kilowatt at 10 centimeters wavelength, 100 times more powerful than existing technology. The Americans mass-produced what the British had invented and the Japanese couldn't replicate. 9 radiation laboratory staff members would later win Nobel Prizes, but their wartime contribution was enabling the electronic revolution that transformed naval combat from visual engagement to radar-directed warfare. The radar revolution forced fundamental changes in naval doctrine that persist today. Every modern Navy acknowledges that electronic detection superseded visual observation as the primary means of naval combat. The United States Naval War College study of 1947 concluded that future naval combat would be determined by electronic capabilities rather than seamanship. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, established in the 1950s, built its founding principles on lessons learned from the radar war. Electronic warfare capability is the foundation of naval power. All other considerations are secondary to sensor superiority. Japanese technical officers who understood radar's implications early were ignored by operational commanders wedded to traditional doctrine. The few officers trained in electronics became prophets without honor, predicting defeat while being dismissed by leadership that refused to acknowledge technological reality. This disconnect between technical understanding and operational doctrine proved fatal. While American forces integrated radar into every aspect of naval operations, Japanese commanders continued planning visual-range night attacks even as their ships were destroyed from beyond sight. The final measure of radar's impact came from comparative loss statistics, a complete reversal. Radar transformed night combat from a Japanese advantage to American dominance. The weapon that Japan had perfected over decades was turned against them with technology they couldn't match. By war's end, of the 70 modern destroyers Japan possessed at Pearl Harbor, only about a dozen remained operational. The Imperial Japanese Navy that had entered the war as masters of night combat ended it unable to venture out after dark. Commander Tameichi Hara, the only Japanese destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to survive the entire war, published his memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain, in 1961. While it contains some factual errors, his assessment of the radar war stands as the most comprehensive first-hand account from the Japanese perspective. Hara participated in 16 major naval battles and witnessed the complete transformation of naval warfare. His ship Amatsuke's survived the November 13, 1942 battle despite severe damage from Helena's radar-directed guns. He later commanded Yahagi and finally the destroyer Shigeru, surviving battles where most of his fellow captains perished. In his memoir, Hara criticized Japanese leadership for failing to appreciate the speed with which the enemy could develop new weapons and never understanding the implications of technological change. He survived to see the Imperial Navy's night-fighting supremacy completely reversed by American radar. Admiral Reizo Tanaka, who commanded the Tokyo Express runs, published his own assessment in 1956, Japan's losing struggle for Guadalcanal, in the U.S. Naval Institute proceedings. He acknowledged that American radar had fundamentally changed naval warfare, making traditional Japanese night fighting tactics obsolete. The radar war forced a philosophical reckoning within Japanese military culture. The fundamental premise of Bushido, that spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantage, was shattered by oscilloscopes and magnetrons. Post-war Japanese military philosophy had to reconcile traditional warrior culture with technological warfare. The lesson was absolute. In modern war, technology is not supplementary but supreme. Those who see first win. Those who see farthest dominate. The final accounting of the radar war in the Pacific provides stark quantification of a technological revolution. Japanese destroyer losses, primarily surface combat. 1942, NOV deck, 4 destroyers. 1943, 31 destroyers. 1944, 28 destroyers. 1945 to August 14 destroyers. American destroyer losses, night surface combat. 1942, NOV deck, 3 destroyers. 1943, 4 destroyers. 1944, 1 destroyer. 1945, 0 destroyers. The technology gap by 1944. American destroyers with effective radar, 175. Japanese destroyers with effective radar, 0. American radar range advantage, 200 to 300%. Japanese night vision advantage, negated completely. These numbers tell the story of a revolution that transformed naval warfare in less than 2 years. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which had spent decades perfecting night combat, was defeated by technology that didn't exist when their training began. The Fletcher-class destroyers with their SG radar sets achieved something unprecedented in military history: the complete negation of an enemy's primary tactical advantage through technological superiority. Japanese night fighting expertise, carefully cultivated since 1904, was rendered worthless by magnetrons and oscilloscopes mass-produced in American factories. Commander Tameichi Hara's survival through 16 major battles gave him a unique perspective on this transformation. From commanding Amatsuke's at Guadalcanal, where he first encountered American radar, to commanding Shiger when it was the sole survivor at Vella Gulf, he witnessed the complete reversal of naval warfare. The Imperial Japanese Navy had entered the war confident that superior night fighting skills would offset American material advantages. By war's end, radar had proven that technological superiority could completely negate human skill, training, and tradition. The Fletcher-class destroyers with their SG radar sets had not just won the destroyer war. They had fundamentally transformed naval warfare from art to science, from human skill to electronic detection, from warrior tradition to technological superiority. The Japanese officers who survived understood a fundamental truth. The age of visual naval combat ended in the waters around Guadalcanal, replaced forever by electronic warfare that cared nothing for courage, tradition, or the warrior spirit. They had been the masters of night combat, perfecting their skills across decades of training. But in just 18 months, American radar turned their mastery into obsolescence, their expertise into irrelevance, and their night fighting advantage into a fatal liability. The darkness that had been their greatest ally became their tomb, and the Americans who wielded radar became the undisputed masters of the night. The revolution was complete, irreversible, and devastating. In the end, those who could see won, and those who remained blind to technological change were condemned to defeat in the darkness they once ruled. Please rewrite this script in a natural and fluent tone with proper grammar and punctuation. Make sure it sounds human, emotionally engaging, and easy to follow, while keeping the original meaning and message intact. November 13th, 1942. 0148 hours. Bridge of the Destroyer. Amatsuke's Iron Bottom Sound. Commander Tameichi Hara gripped the bridge railing as star shells burst overhead, illuminating his destroyer in harsh white light. For 20 years, the Imperial Japanese Navy had perfected night combat into an art form. Now American shells were bracketing his ship before his lookouts could even spot the enemy muzzle flashes. Through the bridge windows, Hara witnessed something that contradicted 2 decades of Japanese naval doctrine. American ships were firing accurately at ranges beyond 10,000 yards in pitch darkness, their shells arriving with Mechanical precision. No searchlights betrayed their positions. No star shells preceded their salvos. The USS Helena's radar-directed guns had found Amatsukaze, and when Hara left his searchlights on too long, trying to find his attackers, the American cruiser's 6-inch shells killed 43 of his crew. 3 kilometers away, the battleship He shuddered under concentrated fire from ships her lookouts couldn't see. The pride of the Imperial fleet, veteran of Pearl Harbor, was being systematically destroyed by enemies fighting from beyond visual range. What no Japanese officer yet understood was that they were witnessing the deployment of the SG surface search radar, technology that would transform naval warfare and destroy Japan's most crucial tactical advantage in 18 months. The mathematics of defeat were being calculated not in ships lost or territories surrendered, but in the sudden obsolescence of 20 years of training, doctrine, and national strategy built on one fundamental assumption, that the Imperial Japanese Navy owned the night. The Imperial Japanese Navy's mastery of night combat had been cultivated since the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. At the Battle of Tsushima, Admiral Togo's torpedo boats had devastated the Russian fleet under cover of darkness. This victory became gospel, establishing night combat as the cornerstone of Japanese naval strategy for defeating numerically superior enemies. By 1942, this doctrine had evolved into the most sophisticated night fighting system in the world. Japanese sailors trained relentlessly in darkness. Lookouts underwent specialized programs to enhance their night vision, spending hours in darkened rooms, avoiding vitamin A deficiencies, and practicing distance estimation in low light conditions. The average Japanese lookout could spot ship silhouettes at 7,000 m on a moonless night, twice the distance of their American counterparts. The technology gap seemed to confirm Japanese superiority. While America relied on primitive radar sets that most captains distrusted, Japanese optics led the world. Their binoculars, manufactured by Nippon Kaku, later Nikon, provided exceptional magnification with superior light-gathering capability. Their Type 93 long lance torpedoes could strike targets at 24,000 yards, far beyond any range at which American ships could detect them at night. The early Pacific War validated every assumption. At the Battle of Tsevo Island on August 9, 1942, Japanese cruisers had annihilated an Allied force in 33 minutes of night combat, sinking 4 heavy cruisers without losing a single ship. At the Battle of Tassaparanga on November 30, 1942, a single Japanese destroyer squadron would savage a superior American cruiser force, torpedoing 4 ships in minutes. Unknown to the Imperial Navy, a revolution in radar technology was occurring in American shipyards and laboratories. The SG surface search radar developed under guidance from the MIT Radiation Laboratory and the Naval Research Laboratory represented a quantum leap from the primitive sets that had failed. At Tsevo Island, operating on a 10 centimeters wavelength with a power output of 50 kilowatts, the SG radar could detect a destroyer at 15 nautical miles and track it accurately enough for blind firing at 10 miles. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, established in November 1940, had grown to nearly 4,000 employees by 1943. The foundation of their work was the cavity magnetron delivered by the British TISAD mission in September 1940, a device historian James Finney Baxter III called the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores. This technology enabled the production of approximately 1,000 SG radar sets. During the war, the first Fletcher-class destroyer, USS Fletcher, DD-445, commissioned on June 30, 1942, carried this revolutionary system as standard equipment. By November 1942, Fletcher herself was operating in the Solomon Islands, though she would be the only Fletcher-class destroyer present at the naval battle of Guadalcanal. The plan position indicator PPI scope provided a god's-eye view of the battle space, displaying all contacts on a circular screen that updated every 2 seconds. Operators could distinguish between ship types by their radar returns, track torpedo wakes, and even spot periscope depth submarines. The system worked equally well in daylight or darkness, clear weather or storms, smoke, or fog. The SG radar was integrated with the Mark 37 gun director, linked to an analog computer that could calculate firing solutions in seconds, automatically adjusting for target speed, course, wind, and ship motion. The 5 inches 38 caliber guns, standard armament on Fletcher-class destroyers, could fire 15 to 20 rounds per minute, with radar-directed accuracy. The night of November 12th to 13th, 1942, would begin the shattering of Japanese assumptions. The naval battle of Guadalcanal began, when Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force intercepted Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment group approaching Henderson Field, while only USS Fletcher represented the new destroyer class. Several ships carried SG radar, including USS Helena. At 0124 hours, USS Helena's SG radar detected Japanese ships at 27,000 yards, far beyond visual range. For the next 20 minutes, American radar operators tracked the approaching Japanese force while Japanese lookouts strained futilely into the darkness. The battle descended into chaos as American radar-directed fire disrupted Japanese formations before they could employ their superior night fighting tactics. The destroyer Akatsuki attempting her specialized night torpedo attack was caught in radar-directed crossfire from multiple American ships. She exploded,